Channel English and more. So today we are going to talk about a very interesting and amusing chapter which is filled with instances of humor, Triumph of Surgery by James Herriot. Okay, so before I begin with the chapter Triumph of Surgery, I would like to introduce the author, who is not just an author but also a veterinary surgeon. So his real name is he's popularly known as James Herriot. His real name is James Alfred White. Okay, so now the story that he has written, since he is a veterinary surgeon, so most of his stories include stories about animals and their owners. So in this story, he talks about a dog, Tricky, and his owner, Mrs. Pumphrey. These are the main characters, and he also is a character in this story. So he is the veterinary surgeon, James Herriot. He is the narrator of the story. He is the author of the story. He also participates in the action. So he's the character as well. So the story starts with Mrs. Pumphrey, who is a rich and emotional lady. Emotional because of her bond with her dog, with whom she considers as her only son and pampers her a lot. So they are going on a walk outside, and Mr. Herriot, he happens to see the dog, and when he sees the dog Tricky, he is shocked. Why? Because Tricky is obese. He is having surplus fat. He is so fat that the narrator compares him to a bloated sausage. Now, if you look at sausage, it is cylindrical in shape. It's a food item. Its shape is cylindrical, and if it becomes bloated is swollen. So it increases in the thickness. So since Tricky was overfed, he became very fat, and his thickness is compared to the thickness of a bloated sausage. So he had rheumy eyes, bloodshot because his eyes were red, and rheumy is having watery discharge. So definitely he was very ill, with legs at each end. But Mrs. Pumphrey, she could not see the unhealthy diet of the dog. She could not understand that whatever she was feeding the dog, it was unhealthy. She used to give him extra items, extra supplements, because she thought that the dog is malnourished and therefore he is listless, he is having no energy, right? So she used to feed him with extra supplements like malt, cod liver oil, even Horlicks. Okay, and she could never refuse the cream cakes and chocolates which Tricky used to love. And Tricky's only fault was his greed. And her owner, that is Mrs. Pumphrey, she was so pampering that she could never refuse any food to Tricky. Right now, the doctor had prescribed a cut in his diet, also to cut the sweet items and give him proper exercise. But Mrs. Pumphrey, being Mrs. Pumphrey, she could not be strict with the dog. It was important for Mrs. Pumphrey to be stern and harden her heart for the well-being of Tricky, because it was hampering the health of Tricky. All those extra items or extra supplements was causing harm rather than good to Tricky. But Mrs. Pumphrey could not understand this, and even she ignored the doctor's advice. And as a result, the doctor could understand the casual approach of Mrs. Pumphrey when he met, and when he again prescribed to cut down on his diet and give him a proper exercise. So he was expecting a call from Mrs. Pumphrey very soon, because he understood, he could foresee that Tricky was going to be seriously ill, despite the fact that he warned him that if you do not cut down on his diet and give him proper exercise, he would be severely ill. But as expected, the call soon arrived, and Tricky became seriously ill. He was refusing food. He had lost his appetite. He had no energy. He was completely listless. He was refusing to even walk. He had developed bouts of vomiting. So at regular intervals, he was feeling, nausea, right? So then what happened now, the writer understood he had to plan for something. He had to definitely take Tricky out of that hospital, out of that control of Mrs. Pumphrey, and he would definitely put him at least for a fortnight. Fortnight is 15 days under observation. Now, the moment this news came, Mrs. Pumphrey, who loved her dog more than anybody, so she was almost about to faint. She was so shocked. She could not tolerate the thought that her dog would be separated from her. And what happened when the news broke out in the house, and Tricky, now the writer was very firm in his decision. He would definitely take Tricky to the hospital and put him under his observation. From here, we can definitely understand a very important characteristic feature of the narrator, that he was very strict as a doctor and he understood his patients very well. He was very tactful as well, because he dealt with Mrs. Pumphrey. He was able to convince Mrs. Pumphrey, who loved her dog to the moon and back, as we call it nowadays. Still, he could convince him to take Tricky away from her and put him under observation. So he was very good and he did his job very well. And Mrs. Pumphrey's characteristic feature, of course, over pampering. Okay, loving is one thing, but over pampering is definitely going to harm the dog, and that's what it did for Tricky as well. Now, what was the condition of Mrs. Pumphrey's household? The entire staff was roused. Everybody was in a panic-stricken situation, crying because they could not bear Tricky being taken away. Mrs. Pumphrey thought that he would die. Tricky would die. He would pine. He would long for Mrs. Pumphrey, right? And Mrs. Pumphrey was very particular about her dog's dress. Now, this is really hilarious. Have you ever seen a dog wearing raincoat? Have you ever seen that dogs wearing different kind of clothes according to the weather? That is really funny, right? So Mrs. Pumphrey used to dress her dog according to the weather, and she was very particular. So from here we can see that Tricky lived a very lavish lifestyle, and Mrs. Pumphrey was a very rich and, she was a rich lady, and she gave the lavish and luxurious lifestyle even to her dog. We can also say that she loved her dog like her own son and pampered her a lot. Okay. Now she started to throw all the day bed, night bed, all those stuffs which Tricky had. Day bed, night bed, his breakfast bowl, his supper bowl, his lunch bowl. Now he had different bowls for different meals. That is also very, very humorous, because we don't usually find this in even human beings, right? So she started throwing all of these items so that it could be taken away along with Tricky to the hospital. Now again, we can see from here humor, and questions also come from this particular paragraph, that what was the condition of Mrs. Pumphrey's household, okay, when Tricky was being taken away. Or else it could come as, why was Mrs. Pumphrey throwing away all the items that belonged to Tricky? Because she wanted Tricky, she wanted the doctor to take all of them along with Tricky, so that Tricky does not face any problem in the hospital. So again, this is a sign of over pampering and being over indulgent. Now at the hospital, the doctor kept him under water diet for 2 days. He did not give him any food. The moment he was brought to the hospital, he was lying motionless, and the other dogs also did not disturb him. They ignored him, because Tricky was lying motionlessly, and they thought that he is of no use, because he was not interested in any of the activities. So they also ignored him, right? Now 2 days he was kept on water diet. Third day, he gradually started to observe things and he started to respond. Okay, so maybe he started to whimper, making sound when he used to hear other dogs barking. And then gradually what happened, initially he was not given food, but he was, the other dogs were fed, and he used to lick the bowls of those dogs. And that is how he gradually gained his appetite. And then when he was given his own bowl, he used to race and compete with the other dogs so that he could finish his own food. So that means he was gradually recovering. The moment this news reached Mrs. Pumphrey, Mrs. Pumphrey again started sending extra supplements and over-pampering Tricky. She thought that Tricky, since he is weak and he is recovering, he needs some energy. So why not send him eggs? So of course, eggs again was too much for Tricky's health. Right now, he did not need egg, right? So what would the narrator do with the egg? So he would have those eggs by himself and he shared with his other staffs as well. And this over-pampering did not stop till egg. Then she started to send wine and brandy, wine to thicken Tricky's blood, and also she started to send brandy. Now this became this was really good for the narrator, because he used to have all those items. And again, this is talking about the jovial nature and humorous nature of the narrator. One more characteristic sketch, point for characteristic sketch for the narrator, right? So he used to enjoy, and with his mates, and lunch used to become a ceremony. So ceremonious lunch he used to enjoy with wine, brandy, eggs, right? But at the same time, he understood that he needs to, so he was, tempted to keep Tricky as his permanent guest. Now this question also comes. Why was he tempted to keep Tricky as his permanent guest? Because of those extra supplies that he was receiving for Tricky. He was of course not giving them to Tricky. How could he give brandy and wine to Tricky? Of course that was not possible, right? So he used to consume all of those, right? And then he called Mrs. Pumphrey. Of course, although he was, he was definitely wanting to keep him as a permanent guest. He was lured to keep him as a permanent guest. But being a genuine doctor, again an important characteristic feature of Mr. Harriet, he was a genuine person, and that is why he understood and sympathized with Mrs. Pumphrey as well, right? So when she used to ask about unnecessary questions related to Tricky's, whether he's dressing, Tricky's not just health but also whether he's dressing up properly according to the weather, so he used to carefully evade those questions. So he used to deal very tactfully with Mrs. Pumphrey, but he also understood that she is concerned for his own dog, and that's why he quickly gave the information that Tricky is ill. Tricky has recovered, and now it is time for Mrs. Pumphrey to take Tricky back. Okay, so now Tricky, the moment Mrs. Pumphrey, the moment she received this information, she came and she was there to fetch Tricky. So when Tricky looked at the sight of Mrs. Pumphrey, he leaped from the lap of the narrator. He jumped to the lap of Mrs. Pumphrey and also started licking her. That suggests that although he was enjoying his stay, because he had befriended many other dogs in the hospital, okay, he was enjoying the stay a lot, because at home he did not have his other friends, right? But here this was something which was different for him, so he was enjoying a lot. He used to enjoy the simple pleasures of canine life, like being bowled over, being trampled, etc., right? So he was enjoying. But the moment he had a sight of his mistress, he started to lick him in happiness and joy, which suggests that he was definitely missing her, of course, because he used to enjoy a lavish lifestyle, and Mrs. Pumphrey used to shower with all her love, right? So definitely there is this bond of love between Mrs. Pumphrey and Tricky. That is quite evident, right? And at the end, Mrs. Pumphrey was really thankful to the narrator, and she says that this is a triumph of surgery. Now here we come to the title of the story, Triumph of Surgery. Triumph means victory. Surgery here would refer to the hospital and also to the natural practice which helped Tricky cure. Okay, so here surgery is not any surgery which was done by the narrator. So here the narrator cures Tricky with his natural techniques. Okay, so that again suggests that Mr. Harriet was a very good doctor, and these kinds of these doctors we definitely need in today's medical field, because we have seen that in today's medical era there are so many doctors who give unnecessary tests, okay, and they are greedy. Okay, they do not serve the mankind. They are rather greedy and they try to extract money. But on the other hand, the narrator, or Mr. Harriet, he was not one of those doctors. He was a genuine doctor who went out of the way to treat Tricky, and that too without any surgery, painlessly, naturally. So when you're writing the character sketch of the narrator, you could include this as the conclusion of your write-up. Okay. Now, what is the theme of this beautiful and humorous story, A Triumph of Surgery? It is based on the theme of, it is kind of a warning of too much, doing too much, loving too much. So too much of anything is very, very harmful, right? Too much of discipline is very harmful because it suffocates. Too much of leniency is also harmful. So rich parents often indulge and overindulge their children with expensive items. Here Mrs. Pumphrey is a rich lady, and although she does not have a child, a human child, but Tricky is equal to a child. So she treats him like her own son. So even parents do this, right? They over pamper children with whatever they want, right? They give them whatever they want. But in this process, what happens is the children, if the parents are overprotective, okay, overindulgent, the children would not be able to tackle difficult situation in the long run. They would be too much dependent on their parents. Okay, so this would be harmful to the children. So Mrs. Pumphrey, in this case, it was harmful for Tricky because she overfed. Okay, so this is a kind of warning to all those parents as well who are overindulgent to their children, because we need to discipline our children. Not too much, but a balance, a healthy balance is required. Not just children, but also our pets, right? So that is definitely a very, very important theme of this very humorous story, Triumph of Surgery. Now, I want you to write an answer on the following question. Please post your answers, homework answers, in the comment section. Do not forget to do so, because that is going to help you out in the long run when you frame your answers, right? So the homework is, excess of everything is bad. Comment in the wake of Mrs. Pumphrey's love for Tricky. Please do not forget to post your homework answers in the comment section. I would love to read your wonderful and creative answers. Okay, and this would definitely help you in attempting this answer, because that's a main theme that encapsulates the main theme of the story, right? So I hope you enjoyed this video, and do not forget to hit the like button if you did enjoy. Do not forget to share it with your friends. And if you haven't yet subscribed to the channel, please go ahead and subscribe to the channel. We would be coming up with a lot more videos only and only for you people. So stay tuned. Happy learning. Bye-bye.